Welcome to the Talking Minds podcast. My name is Marcus Matthews. I am a rapid transformational therapist, clinical hypnotherapist, and coach. And this series, the ManUp Series, I'm going to be speaking to some special guests to look at where men are now in society, where their position is in society, and have they lost their purpose? There's lots of empowerment groups out there for many people, but are men being excluded, and can they really have a voice in society today? Join me on the Talking Minds podcast. Hello everybody, welcome to the Talking Minds podcast. It's Marcus Matthews with you again. Tracy's not with us, she can't make it onto this podcast, but I do have my very good friend, Ben Calder. Hello, Ben.
Hi, Marcus. Thank you for having me along. It's great to be on your podcast and having a chat about all things interesting today.
All things interesting, yeah. So the reason why I got Ben on is I've known Ben for some time and I've learned a lot from him. And one of the things he introduced me to is integral theory. And I'll get him to talk a little bit about that, but he's done a lot of work on integral relationships. And this whole ManUp series is about those intricacies of our relationships with each other and the relationships in how we perceive each other and all of these dynamics that are going on at the moment between men and women and all just being human. So I want to kind of bring Ben in to give his perspective on this because I know he's done a lot of work on this. So Ben, you just want to introduce yourself, tell everybody who you are, because I know who you are, but other people listening don't. So if you want to tell everybody who you are, and then we'll dive straight into it, because I'm really excited about this to see what your thoughts are.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. I mean, it's always interesting to try and create a potted history of who I am as well, in that I've been involved in and connecting into various forms of natural and complementary health work for 30 years now in various ways, working in a professional context now for the last 18 years, and have been kind of founded my clinic, Centre for Integral Health, that you're a part of now, and that'll be 8 years this coming August. So it's been a really interesting kind of period of time, and within that I work as an integral practitioner, and I use tools such as kinesiology, Bowen techniques, scar tissue release, Qigong, integral transpersonal psychology, integral theory, integral relationships work, epigenetics and nutritional and dietary work. So I really try and look at least the four basic dimensions that we find in integral theory that we can talk through a little bit in a little while. And I find that this is one of the most complete and useful models for being able to make sure that when we're looking at health, that we're covering all of the basic bases that people exist in on a daily basis, regardless of whether they know it or not.
Yeah, and I think the thing that I love about this when you introduce me to it is that you've got all that, but it's not just kind of linear and flat. It's kind of multi-dimensional and moves in various different ways. So you've never got it. You're always moving in one direction or the other in each area. So there is a constant workflow, and there is no, as we say, there's no right, there's no wrong. You are where you are now, but it will change tomorrow.
Sure.
I think that's what I want to try and get across in this podcast, is about the fact that we've seen as this linear path, that this is what the world looks like and this is who we should be.
Yeah.
And we don't give ourselves a break.
and yet, from an integral point of view, what we do is we consider that all of our worldviews, all of our ways of looking at life, all of our ways of experiencing life are whole within themselves, but they're partial to other wholes. And some perspectives have more depth and more breadth to them than others. And quite often what we're doing is we're moving through stages of development that become increasingly complex as we go along. And within that, each time we move up a level, we transcend those limitations that we had in our previous stage of development. We include all of the useful stuff with us, and then we enter into a new perspective that has new possibilities, new considerations, but also its own new limitations.
Definitely. And one of the things that I obviously, when I'm working with clients, is, self-esteem, confidence, and anxiety are a big thing. And a lot of the things that people are looking for when we look at these relationships, we look at self, are actually based on things that are outside of our control. So affection, approval, appreciation, being accepted, being acknowledged. And actually, that's quite a tough thing to go, actually, I'm going to be responsible. And actually, that's me. And I'm not going to push that out on other people. So that kind of segues really into the main theme of this podcast, which is about this change of dynamic in regards to how we're showing up in the world. You know, we had back in the day, we've always had this traditional structure of man is alpha on top, woman in kitchen, that kind of stuff. Now that's completely changed now, which it should do, and absolutely, but that dynamic's now shifting where we've still got these old subconscious feelings and thoughts of this is what a man looks like, this is what a woman looks like. But societies tell us, no, if you're a woman now, this is who you are. And if you're a man, this is who you are. So we're all completely screwed up. But men in particular are very, we're those lone lions, aren't we? We haven't got our tribe. So where women will gather together to support, we tend not to have that. So can we go into this Shadow King thing, if that's okay?
Yeah, we can.
Unless you want to say about
before we
something
get
else.
to that, because I know you're excited about that one, and you know, glad you're excited about that. But just to address a little bit that idea of these traditional values, I don't think we really have a concept of the timescales that are involved within this and why there are some of these divisions. And if we look back to at least 100,000 years ago, when we have early survival bands, groups of people coming together, we have natural divisions in our roles based on the characteristics that are present within each sex. So, you know, many of us will appreciate that in a hunter-gatherer society, the stronger percentile of the group would have been the hunters, and the weaker percentile of the group were more likely the gatherers. And you know, we can look back historically and think that this was patriarchal society, but actually there's plenty of evidence to suggest that some cultures were what we would class as patrifocal, in that they were more geared towards masculine values. Some were matrifocal, in that they were more geared towards feminine values, and some had a balance between the two. And so it was never just cut and dried. And as time and space have evolved within human beings, so have we. So for the 90,000 years that we were predominantly hunter-gatherers, the majority of men are hunting, and they're out sitting on hillsides or hiding in forests or waiting in plains for game to come by. So they spend a lot of time in silence. They spend a lot of time in stillness. So they just don't develop language skills in the same way that females do. And they develop long-range vision that's better at gauging size and speed and movement because they need to do that for hunting. Whereas the females predominantly who are gathering, they develop better peripheral vision because they're looking around more, and they develop more language, partly because they're in a social situation where they don't need to be quiet, and secondly because the noise also helps to keep predators away. So typically females are using about 3 times as much language and have, you know, more language development than males. And that's one of the reasons why within languages, you know, especially within things like interpretation, you tend to have a predominance with females. In activities that take spatial awareness, you tend to have a predominance in males. And that's just the architecture at a physical level. But as we move through culture and move on, we get to a point where we go from hunter-gatherer into early horticultural stages using digging sticks and hoes. Now, at that point, we're still hunting, we're still gathering, and you know, male-female roles stay very similar. When we move into our agrarian stages around 10,000 years ago, when we started really farming and we brought beasts in to start working with us, one of the factors of working with heavy beasts is it actually increased the miscarriage rate. So part of what happens is less women work in farming because it's there to ensure that there's more likelihood of successful childbirth. So roles start to change. And because at that stage, we don't need as many men to do the work, that's also where we start to develop other aspects that such as art, culture, politics, philosophy, religions, they all start to emerge around a similar time period because of those changes in the environment and how we're interacting in it. So we've been going through these changes for tens of thousands of years continually, and we're now into a new phase of that. And with the stages of development that consciousness goes through, we do get into increasingly complex societies that have different rules and roles, and we're moving through such a phase now where thankfully we're also seeing some of the pathological aspects of our previous levels are being addressed, resolved, spoken about. And we need to, in some ways, look at this over larger time scales. This is transitional period that might go on for 2, 3, 4, 500 years or more. It's not about what we can do in 3, 5, 10, 50 years. These roles have been so deeply embedded that it's going to take time, and there's going to be some dead ends and blind alleyways and other areas where it doesn't work out. But it is all part of that evolution of humans as a race, as the culture and the environment develop and change.
And it's interesting because you say about communication. One of the things that I picked up on there, and I'd never really thought about this, but I've been looking around ADHD and stuff like that, and that hunter-gatherer and that silence and that lack of communication. And you can see a direct correlation, because ADHD is very much now being called, it's the hunter or the farmer, that the ADHD actually is not, it's not a disorder. It's actually just an old mind in which we needed. It works, hyper-focus, all that sort of stuff. It's linked with the hunter. Even though females do have ADHD, it's normally prevalent, and that's a big conversation at the moment. And all of that stuff that you said makes perfect sense. And I always say this, and I've said it before on the podcast. Why is it that women go to the toilet together? Well, it's because back in the day when we were in the forest, if you went on your own, you might get ambushed. So go in a group and you're safe. And we're not aware of the subconscious program that's gone on for millennia. And because we want information, we want transformation, we want it quick, we want it now, we're thinking, right, well, we're going to just change the world in 30 years. It's taken, like you said, 10,000 years just to get to where we are now. And then all of a sudden we're going, well, I want this, and it's your fault, and it's yesterday. And it's all changing now. And that's why both men and women are so confused. Yeah. So I want to get onto this, because just to let everybody know, Ben just mentioned a book, which I'm going to get, but it's called The Shadow King. So I think that segues quite nicely into these perceptions. So do you want to just tell us a little bit about what you're telling me just there?
Because I've been interested in masculine feminine dynamics for a number of years, partly just because from a historical basis, I am a child of a broken home, if you want to class it as such. My mother and father separated when I was 2 years old, and that was something that came about because of domestic violence within the home. And so my own platforms for how I dealt with relationships were based very much on being the youngest of 3 boys, being raised by a mother that, my brothers are 6 and 8 years older than me. So their experiences, their perceptions were different than mine because they experience things in a different way. And it formed a very particular view of relationships, which, I'm still unpeeling and I'm still unpacking and I'm still dealing with some of those aspects. It really is the old adage, as you chop the top off the iceberg, more raises up. And there is a lot more that it's only in specific situations and only with specific dynamics that I'm really seeing coming up. And, I can talk about a lot of the teachers that have really impacted me in relationship dynamics, but there was a really key piece of work written by a lady called Sidra Stone. And her husband, Hal, were the originators of the voice dialogue system, of being able to talk to parts of the self. And that was then taken on board and developed by my Zen teacher, Genpo Roshi, who uses it within the Big Mind process within his Zen practice. And Sidra wrote this beautiful book called The Shadow King. Now, as a female who was doing a lot of workshops for females, looking at the voices that created limitations for them and the kinds of dialogues that they were having with themselves, which is, something that you're really aware of. She found that women were often referring to men and the patriarchy in a way that was disembodied. So she realized that there was a voice of patriarchy that existed, and that could be the voice of men or the voice of our man, the voice of the patriarchy, which existed inside the minds of females, that were females dressed up as the patriarchy, telling themselves where they were limited. So they were actually creating their own limitations, believing that it was men that were imposing those limitations on them, but really it was a voice, and they would have picked up these subtle cues through their upbringing from society. So it's all these memes as subconscious messages that then build up into its own structure within the mind, and then we use that mind to define the patriarchy. Now, equally, there is a voice of the matriarchy that exists, you know, because this isn't just in the minds of females. So as a male, I have both the voice of the patriarchy and the voice of the matriarchy, and they have their own rules and they have their own beliefs, and they inform me about right and wrong action according to their rules and beliefs.
Yeah.
But it's a concept, it's not something real. So essentially, we end up telling ourselves what we think we can and can't do, but then displacing it into the voice of something that we think we have no control over.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, and this is why I think the integral stuff is kind of layers onto that, because we said just before we start the podcast is what I've noticed is that there's people are at different evolutions. So if we talk about women, when I've had open conversations as a man, this is how I feel, this is my perception. And they go, yeah, I get that. And one of my coaches, Danita DeZeus, who works with Lisa Nichols, we were talking about this, and she said she gets it. She works with a lot of men, and she's done a lot of work on this herself. And she said, excuse my French, it's shit being a man at the moment. That's coming from a woman. She said, we've got everything that society and you know, social media is saying that men are bad. But there are women who go, no, men aren't bad because they've had a good. So what you're telling me that I need to feel this, and it's all of these old hurts, and it's all of these things that many people aren't aware are subconscious, you know. And we're looking to go, I feel this, therefore it must be something outside of me that's the problem. And that's why I think this is really, really important to have these conversations to say, well, where is that? Why is that there? Where has that come from? Where is the truth in what I'm saying? Because when I speak to some men and women, when I have these conversations, I go, okay, where is the truth in that? Show me where is the evidence? And if there is evidence, they go, it's back there. You know, it's 20 years ago. You know, and I've had these conversations about the police. You know, I was in the police, and people go, the police are all bullies. And okay, where's the evidence? In 1984, we're not in the 80s anymore. There's a different point of reference, but people, when you ask them that question, go, oh, wait a minute, my point of reference is, but it must be true because it's in my past. Yeah. But I'm holding on to that. You know?
And of course, that is absolutely legitimate as well. There is so much abuse that so many women have suffered at the hands of so many men.
Absolutely.
I also fully understand that, you know, when you're faced with an archetype that, you know, any man is a man, any woman is a woman, and so there's a response within that. And I think one of the really interesting things that highlights that, there was a brilliant film made a few years ago called The Red Pill.
Still not seen this. You keep telling me about this.
It's an amazing film made by a young female American filmmaker called Cassie J. It's available on all the usual channels. And she, at the time, wanted to take a look at and try and do an expose on rape culture and try and understand what was going on with that. And there are some, you know, some really crazy places on the internet regarding this. And so she, at the beginning of the film, defines herself as a feminist. Because that's how she'd been raised, and she'd experienced a lot of the misogyny within Hollywood as a young actress, and ultimately left acting because of that and decided to move into filmmaking. Now, some of this, you know, within the film, she interviews a lot of very interesting people on both sides. And one of the things that she beautifully highlights in there is that, you know, in the UK, one of the first women's refuges that was opened way back in the 70s, the lady who developed that also started very quickly highlighting that women were as bad as men, and men were suffering almost as much domestic abuse at the hands of women as they were from men. And she tried to open a men's refuge and was receiving death threats, was really shouted down by women that men don't need this. And even at the time of the film's release, the Red Pill's film's release, which I think is 2016, 2017, there were over 250 women's refuges in America, but only 2 for men. If you look at the thousands of beds that are available in women's refuges in the UK for women, there are still only about 20 for men for domestic abuse. And those characters who were involved in supporting that side of domestic abuse for men are often kind of cast out from certain feminist circles because it can't be true, and they have this beautiful collective name of the honey badgers. They're the women that can understand that men are suffering too, and we don't realize, although we know it's 1 in 3 women are experiencing domestic abuse at home, we don't realize that there's 1 in 4 men are. So it's not a massive difference. And
I wonder, I just want to go back to what we talked about before, when we talked about our skill sets, and that I've got this image of this kind of hunter on a hill looking over a plain in silence and not needing these communication skills. And I wonder whether, like most mental health, when we look at physical health, where we've got a tangible break in a leg, a tangible break, I can see that, I can fix it. Mental health, I can't see it, therefore it mustn't exist. And maybe this is really hit home with me, is that when I'm going to use the word abuse, but I'm going to use that loosely, is that we look maybe at domestic violence very much as, yes, there is verbal abuse, there is mental abuse, but often it's physical abuse. There's bruises, there's that power imbalance in regards to physical power. However, one of the things as a man is that many women don't physically overpower men, but they do mentally and from a communication point of view overpower men. And I can say that personally myself, is that the amount of conversation that the silent treatment, I'm going to be all thingy now, but we know as men and women we have the silent treatment. There's enough memes out there about how women can control men, and there's phrases that women use that mean the opposite, and as men we're very literal. It's like, just tell me what it is you want, I don't want to play the games. But actually, taking that historically, that communication, we don't have that, and often women don't get that fact that we just don't get it. It's like, tell us as it is, we just don't get it. And actually that side of abuse, and my background and about suicide and stuff, it was the mental game for me. It was, this is what I believed people thought. I wasn't good enough. I wasn't providing where I should do as a man. I wasn't doing my hunter-gatherer role in society as society defines it. So often, we do. Is there much work going on about mental abuse around domestic violence and stuff? Probably not, because it's not tangible, is it? It's very difficult to see what's going on.
I mean, you and I both know the stigma towards mental health, and for men to be able to break through that, it is an ongoing and interesting piece of work. And I agree that the mental health side of it is part of it. But what I don't think is acknowledged readily enough is the fact that there are a lot of what I would class as beta males who are potentially physically and mentally weaker than the female counterparts they end up with. And it's surprising how much physical abuse. There's actually a really interesting case that's just concluded in America, where a woman in her 20s came home to her partner and at machete point, holding a machete to his neck, forced him to have sex with her. And it went to court and she was convicted, but they wouldn't convict her of rape, even though essentially it was rape. So, there's a surprising amount.
That is very interesting, because the definition, Section 1 of the Sexual Offences Act, interestingly enough, rape can only happen by a man. There needs to be a penis involved, technically.
Yes.
Or it's an insertion. So yes, theoretically you could do it, with a dildo, or there's going to be a penetration, but in most cases it is a physical act by a man. So straight away it's down to section 2 of the act. So even within our laws, it can't happen. Obviously, a man can rape another man, but he's got.
Yep.
But and so when we look at this fact about, I don't like to use the word equality, but you can never have equality. Really, you can have equality in regards to the true nature of what equality is opening opportunities for everybody. That is equality, but you'll never have, there's a massive debate on this, and we won't go down that with transgender and sport and all the rest of it. We're not even going to go there. That's a whole different topic. Yeah. For me, it's the psychological aspect of it. So we talked about men. I'm really interested now just to flip it over to women, and the fact that a lot of women now feel there's a new dynamic of what a woman is, and there's a lot of, it's as if women have taken this task on because they go, oh, well, now I'm the homemaker, and now I've got to do this, and I've got to get a job, and I've got to do, and you men need to do more about it. So women have taken these responsibilities on and blaming men again, not all. And I'd love to know, your thoughts on that in regards to where that's come from, because I think that's a big thing for women.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's a very nuanced situation, and within this, I can only share an opinion that comes from a certain perspective. But one of the things that we could talk about is that in stages of consciousness development, and we could use something like spiral dynamics or integral theory to kind of back this up, there is the rational worldview, which emerged essentially from the Renaissance, Industrial Revolution and onwards, where we moved into very science and materialistic types of thinking. And in a lot of ways, that was a very masculine orientated kind of process. Now, about kind of 150 years ago, we start to move more into what's known as the postmodernistic or pluralistic worldview. And within this, we start to have a much greater awareness of equal rights for people. And that includes things like equal rights for women, equal rights for people of different cultures, different creeds, different skin colors, and so on, ethnic backgrounds. We start to see the first edgings of our eco-awareness of how we have this impact on the world. And it created a really interesting shift, because as we started to create other opportunities for females to be able to have their fair expression into, let's say, science, research, the workplace, they were very male-dominated places. So in a lot of cases, females had to take on very male characteristics to be able to survive. And it was either you had to, kind of masculinize, or you had to be quiet. Yeah, you had to man up, or you had to be quiet. And so, I mean, you've only got to look at science and research and the nature of how difficult it was for women, from the 50s, 60s onwards, and even today, to be able to get research grants, to be able to get publication and so on. And so that's created this harder competitive edge within a lot of females to try and find equal footing. So, and I think it's a very challenging time. We're still in a lot of transition for that, where men who, as you've already kind of highlighted, are maybe afraid that they don't have a role anymore to be able to allow that within females without losing their sense of value and purpose within that. And what it's created is a very interesting dynamic, because within a relationship, there will be a masculine feminine dynamic, but whoever is in the masculine, the other person can only really be in the feminine. If they're not, they have to dominate the situation to be able to be more masculine, at which place the other person will become more feminine. So what we're actually seeing is, as women are experiencing this masculine side of themselves in a new way, and they're exploring that and experiencing that, which has both healthy and unhealthy aspects to it, in my opinion, we're seeing men transition into the feminine. So, and this is where some of our trans culture is being more open within the world. This is also where men are starting to open to feelings. They're starting to change their sense of behavior, where they become much more ambiguous, much less clear, much maybe, and that is as irritating as hell to
Yeah.
masculine females, because it's not clear where we're coming from, and we also don't know, because we're only just starting to explore this. And in my own journey, trying to find that balance of retaining my overt masculinity, because there's no doubt I am overtly masculine in comparison to the majority of females. So where's my balance of that, and where's my balance within my own femininity, so I can have compassion, I can feel softness, I can emote, I can be in all those spaces, and I can balance that in a healthy way, recognize my unconscious and my toxic and unhealthy aspects, and healthily work to transform those.
And I think the important thing that we need to look at here is to take it away from the physical. Maybe women aren't aware that they are both male and female. Maybe men aren't aware that they're both male and female. It's not a physical condition. And often that's the way it's portrayed. You're a man. You look like this. You are a man. This is you got the physical appendages and all that. You are a man. Therefore you are. You are a female. Therefore you are. But it's not about the physicality of masculinity or femininity. It's zero to do with that. And I think that's what a lot of people dwell on. Maybe, I don't know.
I mean, I think there is both aspects to it. There is, because again, if we go from integral theory, we have the first two sides of our quadrants are the subjective and the objective. In the subjective, it's mind and culture. So within that, we're creating new mental structures and new cultural structures that represent that fluidity within that. And again, this is where we go into kind of gender politics in a way, in that I can identify with aspects of myself that are not necessarily to do with my sex. But we can also look at the fact that there are changes in what we're able to do with our bodies that, for instance, you look at female bodybuilders and people that are competing at very elite levels of sport, they're way stronger than I am. They're much more kind of physically apt than I am. And you'll have men who, maybe look better in a dress, because their physical shape and so on. So I don't think any of it is fixed. I think the challenge we have is in allowing people choice, and that being okay for people to choose whatever feels appropriate for them, without us being judgmental and without us ostracizing people who don't want to hold the same worldview as us. And as long as everything is consensual and nobody's directly harming anybody else, why shouldn't we do those things?
Well, I think it's about opening up conversations, because one of my coaches, Danita, was talking about this on something, and it was interesting that when she got into a relationship with a former partner, she felt that she wanted to look after him. She did that by choice. So she would cook and she would clean. As the relationship got on, one day he came over and just said to her, "Oh, what's for tea tonight?" And she doesn't like cooking. She did it out of love. She did it out of the fact that she did it because of that. However, she had the emotional awareness. Instead of going, "Who the F do you think you are?" she went, "Oh, sorry, I've just realized what I've done." So she took that on, because she's a coach. She took that on and went, "Oh my God, I've created this situation. And now he said something that has triggered me, as if you're the little wife in the kitchen, but actually I've created that." And all she said was this: she went, "Oh my God, I'm really sorry. I actually don't like cooking. I've been doing this because I love you. I'm taking care of you. I actually hate cooking. So I just want to tell you that." And he went, "Oh my God, I thought you liked cooking. And that's why I just asked that question. Okay, let's go out and eat." So what then happened is they opened a communication channel to say, "Okay, you don't like doing that. Let's share when I'll cook on Monday and Tuesday, you cook, and then we'll go out on a Friday," whatever. But they opened that communication because there was an assumption because that was a traditional role, and they're from an Afro-Caribbean background as well. So it's kind of, a matriarchal, mother who creates all that food and it's all amazing and yummy, but she wasn't of that ilk, and kind of went, no, that's not me, that's not what I do. And that's what I think that we all need to be able to do. And I've certainly had this difficult conversation, with my own wife. I won't go into details because Michelle will kill me. There we go, straight away. But what I'd said was that Michelle reacted to something that I said, and I went, no, this isn't about you. This is about me processing my emotional reactions to something that you've done. And I've mentioned this before, that Michelle uses this against me quite a lot now. If I say, you made me feel, she'll go, actually, that's not the case, because only you can make yourself feel that way. And it becomes a joke now, but it's building those relationships. So,
and that really highlights nicely as well that example from your coach there, that there are actually so many expectations within relationships that come from our own family cultural developments. And there are so many unspoken rules and conversations that take place in relationships, because we assume that the other person is going to agree with those unspoken and often unrealized rules that we have about how relationships are going to play out. And unless we are able to say, what are your views on this? What are your views on this? How do you feel about this? Which, let's face it, are very functional discussions in some way. They're not exactly sexy when you're getting into a new relationship to have some of those discussions. And yet my integral relationships teacher, Martin Uchik, that's exactly what he does in early stages of relationships, is that he wants to understand what the communication style is, what their level of development is, where they are in their spiritual development, their sexual development, their anima-animus complex, their personality types, their attachment styles, their life purpose, all of these different bits that are part of that essential elements within a healthy relationship, and how once we have those conversations, it's much easier to work out the functional fit. And a lot of the time, we're so engaged essentially with what I would class as a Cinderella level relationship, is that somebody that meets our primary sexual fantasy is interested in us, and we think that that's it. We don't, it's happily ever after. We don't have to do anything else.
And I think it's a little bit like, I love this analogy. I've started using this myself, but it's a little bit, if you imagine your life or your relationships, you can put it as finite as you want. But if you imagine that you've gone on a journey to where you are now, and imagine that where you are now is a shopping mall, a shopping center, and you're looking for this or you're looking for that shop. When you go into one of those big malls, what do? You look for the sign that says you are here. But often we don't do that. We don't go, right, this is where I am now. Where are you now? How do we meet to get to that? How do we go on that journey together? So do you want to just tell us a little bit more about the integral relationship stuff and what you do and how that, because I think what we need to do is allow people to, if you're going to give them advice on, okay, you're having these stories in your head, male or female, okay, and you're going, I love my partner, or I'm in this situation, but I don't really seem to be able to have those conversations, taking what you know from this integral relationship stuff, what would your advice be to somebody starting that journey? How would they open those conversations? What could they do right now?
I mean, from that point of view, I think one of the first things that needs to be agreed on is that the two of you are willing to look at things that are uncomfortable. And I think in too many situations, and this is not just in intimate relationships, but in relationships in general, we avoid discomfort because we think that it means that there is something critically wrong and terminally wrong within a space. And yet these might just be things that we've never explored within ourselves before. So even to develop a communication model of how to speak to each other so that you're able to start having the challenging conversations. And that also for me involves arranging that to agree to do that. So, it's not always a good time to have a conversation. And I remember reading a book many, many years ago, only a little tiny thing called The Gift of Therapy. And one of the chapters in it was entitled Strike When the Iron is Cold. You know, sometimes it's better to just sit back, let something settle, and then make an arrangement to have a discussion about something. So both people are prepared to meet in a space to talk about a thing. And I think that the second thing is that relationships are complex. There are multi kind of dimensional aspects to them. And, you know, within Martin Uchik's integral relationships work, there are 14 essential elements within a relationship. And if we're not, you know, we don't need to be at the same level or in the same place with all of them, but it is helpful to understand where we are. You know, like how many of us know what our partner's love language is, you know, which is in my mind quite essential, because if your love language is words of affirmation, you want me to tell you that I love you and that you look good and I really appreciate you, I do. But my love language is quality time or gifts. You know, every time that you're telling me that you love me but not giving me a gift, I'm confused. Every time I'm giving you a gift but not saying that I love you, you're confused, because we don't understand, you know. And for me, Christmases and birthdays are a perfect example of this. How often does your partner get you something that isn't really what you want, but you can understand how they like it? You know, because we're coming from perhaps different love languages. So being able to even understand some of these things, you know, are you an anxiously attached person as an attachment style? So, you know, when we understand these different aspects of ourselves, it's much easier to understand somebody's behavior. And, you know, even if you know that somebody is coming from a more masculine point of view, but their sexual development is still maybe limited to only fucking, and they see the opposite sex as something to be feared, you know, all of which are different types of aspects. You know, it can make a big difference as to the types of relationships we have. So by understanding and exploring these different elements within a relationship with each other, you know, we actually have much more intimate and much deeper relationships, because we understand each other at completely different levels. And, you know, hands up, I'm still working through all of that.
We all are.
You know,
We all are.
you know, yeah, absolutely. So myself and my partner, we're still working through areas that have either been unconscious for us or have been difficult for us. And we're in the moments where it's right to, we're fostering and nurturing development and change in there. And so sometimes that means that we still clash and we still act unconsciously and we can still upset each other, but we're much more prepared to step back, let the dust settle, tune into what's going on for ourselves, come back together, have the discussions, take the learning and move forward with it, which ultimately, that's every relationship. You know, we need to drop the old Cinderella ideas. We need to drop the rom-com ideas that, you know, I mean, again, it's one of the things I love about rom-coms. You can almost, to a T, take every rom-com, you know, two people meet, two people fall in love for some reason or feel each other, then there's a conflict that separates them, then they find a way to come back together and everything's fine again. You know, that's the nature, you know, more detail, but that's the nature of rom-coms. So we have to look at the memes that have educated us for relationships and consider, well, what's missing? If I have that image of a relationship and yet the relationships that I'm experiencing don't match up, where am I missing information that if I had it could allow me to create transformation, understanding, realization? You know, and I think we really need, in our modern age, which is the most complex living and life arrangement that human beings have ever seen, you know, we need to be aware that there are these multiple elements that all of which need to be in some frame of awareness.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is our mind is always very it always goes to the negative. And I think one of the things that's journaling for me is getting it out of your head and putting it on paper is the best way of doing it. And then looking for the evidence of where that's come from, and also looking for the opposite. You know, we all know gratitude. We've talked about this, haven't we, on our on the Facebook thing with integral health. But looking at, you know, if you've got a partner, say for example, you know, I'll give you an exact example of this. My wife, amazing cook. However, it looks like World War II. Every pan is out. It's all over the place. And for me, that's like, oh, it just winds me up. Now, I could freak out about that, but I recognize that that's happened. And I automatically will go, okay, breathe. You've had an amazing meal. And this is just what's happened. Actually, in the grand scheme of things, it's not a big thing. However, what we've agreed to is I've said, I am not going in there clearing that stuff up. If it means we don't eat, I am not. So that kind of, you've got to have your non-negotiables. I think your non-negotiables are really important to go, this is what I love about you, and this is what I love about myself. And then you can just work on the non-negotiables. How can you work out, you know, it might be, okay, we'll take the washing up one because it's just a simple one. Okay, I know that you do the cooking, but I will only do the washing up 3 days out of the 5 because I can't do it every day. I can't cope with that every day. That's just a funny way of looking at it, but it's then looking at your non-negotiables. And I think the other thing is that if your non-negotiables, and that's without, you know, being selfish, outweigh the love and the joy that person brings into your life. And I don't mean just in a romantic relationships, that could be with a job. You know, for me, when I left the police, that was a relationship. I love that job. I miss it. But my non-negotiable was I can't ethically stay there because the values that have been driven home to me now are mismatched with what I've been told it was. You know, and that was a tough decision. But actually quitting something that you hate will lead to the thing that you want. Because when you know where you are, when you've got I am here, and you can work that out. Now, we can do that because we've done the work on ourselves. But I think this is where working with people like yourself and the integral relationship courses and all that sort of stuff, this is where it's worth that investment. If you're not happy, go and see a therapist, go and see somebody who knows about this. Even if it's, you know, you deal with that in a relationship context, I work with it from the subconscious level. And that's why we've worked on this stuff. You know, we're not perfect, like you say, we're still working on it. It's not about the technicalities. It's actually about the awareness in the first place. Because if you're not aware of it and you don't know where you are, then you can't go anywhere, can you? You know, and that's the big thing.
And an easy way for me of framing that is the juice worth the squeeze? You know, so is what you're gaining from a relationship in a healthy way worth the time and the energy within it? And although, you know, I understand the negotiables and the non-negotiables from a conventional relationship point of view, I would also say that we have this is how it is, except when it isn't. And that I need this to be like this, except on the occasions where I don't.
Yeah.
And it's also a way of kind of being aware that nothing is set in stone. Actually, you know, there's ebb and flow within a space, and then it's what's significant about those things to me that I can't let go of, you know. And I mean, one of the things that I kind of rationalized for myself quite a long time ago in relationships is, you know, if there's something about that your partner does that gets on your noggin, then just remember that that's not their problem.
No, you know, absolutely. And this is when I say non-negotiables, that's kind of what I'm saying is what's your non-negotiables and how are you taking responsibility and daring greatly to either accept that that's yours and go, is it worth me just living with that? Or daring greatly and having that conversation. And like you say, striking while the iron's cold, and the writing down can often be, listen, this is how I'm feeling. And this is my perception of how I think you will react if I say this. Is it a truth? Because I found that pretty much, I'm going to say 100% of the time, every time I've had this conversation, is, no, that's not my thought. That's not my thought. That wasn't what I was thinking.
And why is it non-negotiable? Where does that come from? Where does that basis come from? you know. And I mean, I always used to use the kind of analogy, you know, if you get pissed off by your partner, like leaving their underwear on the floor, or, you know, not tidying up about themselves, you've got three really easy things you can do. You can ignore it because it ain't about you.
Yeah.
You can just pick the stuff up and put it somewhere out the way so it doesn't bother you, or you can talk to the person and say to them, this is something that impacts me. I'm wondering if we could work with that.
Yeah.
So that there's ownership within it, and there is a reasonable request about change without trying to make it somebody else's responsibility.
Absolutely. Yeah. And that's it. When you take responsibility, you're able to respond, aren't you? So we've been going, we could talk forever.
Always.
So I just wanted to ask two last questions. That's what they're quick ones. So if anybody's listening to this, male or female, and they are in that position where they're going, okay, I've heard that about responsibility, but I'm still triggered. I'm not sure where it comes from. You know, I liked what Ben was saying. What is it that you can offer as part of your services and what you do? What is it that you've got that can help people get these realizations in regards to finding self and taking responsibility and ownership?
Yeah, well, as I have been for quite a while now, and although formally it was only 2020 that I received the qualification and training for this, but I can work with you on that integral relationships model. We can, you know, either online or in person, we can explore that, and I can work with singles and couples with that. And it doesn't matter what sexual orientation or gender that is, or ethnic background at all. You know, we look at where people are struggling and explore that from a point of view of, here's some theory around that. Here's a practice that you can go and do to explore that, either on your own or with your partner. And let's explore why those tensions are in there. And, you know, again, we come back to, is the juice worth the squeeze? Do you want to be in this relationship enough that you're prepared to explore your discomfort, and you're prepared to explore discomfort that your partner might have around your behavior and your attitudes and your beliefs and your expectations on them? Because we often, all right, in my experience, often people want their partner to make the change, you know, which of course is the easy way. I'd much rather the world just changed around me and I didn't have to do anything. But really, we need to face those uncomfortable bits about, maybe I'm the problem, you know, maybe I'm the one that's got unrealistic expectations of my partner, and I'm, you know, bitching at them because I'm not getting what I want, but we've never had the discussion about whether or not that's reasonable.
I think the uncomfortable truth that I certainly came to was, and I still say this now, when things are going wrong, I am the problem. It's as simple as that. But the beauty of this is, that sounds negative, like I'm the problem. How? I'm not taking responsibility of this or there. I'm the problem. But because you're the problem, you're also the solution. So you have, and that is the beauty of that. But what the only difference is that maybe you don't have the knowledge or know how to navigate through that. And that's why we're working with somebody like yourself, working on yourself. And, you know, we've got lots of practitioners at the Integral Health that can help with that sort of thing. And I think it's also important to say that it's not just about relationships or partnerships within the home or the family. You know, when we talk about that, it is a very holistic, that's a partner, that's relationships at work, that's relationships with family. So it's a lot more, you know, expansive than that. So
and that's what I like about that integral relationships model, is that we can understand where the conflict, where the challenge is in the relationship, and look at that element, you know, in isolation, but also broaden it out to realize that there can be other bits in there. And you know, what you were saying reminded me of the meme that's often been linked up to a Jack Sparrow photo, is that the problem is not the problem. The problem is you're thinking about the problem.
Yeah, it is. And that's it. And every habit of action is driven by a habit of thought. So most of the time, actually, the problem is never the thing. The problem is the thought of the thing, or your perception thinking about the problem about the thing. Anyway, brilliant. Last thing. So we always have on here a kind of a go-to quote, but we'll make this kind of, I want to make this about men because it is called the man up thing. So if you're a man and you're going, I just don't know where I am in the world. I don't know my purpose. I don't know what I'm doing. Is there a quote, or is there a bit of advice that you can give to that person listening now, or even a partner or a sister of somebody who knows that they're feeling that way? What advice or quote would you give that would make that person make that step to go, let's think differently?
I'm going to take this from work done by David Dada, who is one of my favorite relationship coaches. And he, again, looks very much at an integral level and a very integrated practice. And he talks a lot about masculine, feminine polarities and the difference between what each person, and they're not gender defined, their capacities within anybody. And the overtly feminine are more interested in fullness and fullness in love, and we may find that in mediocre ways such as eating, conversation, and shopping, because they're a way of filling up, but it's fullness in love. The masculine, on the other hand, is seeking freedom, and it's freedom from burdens. And often the masculine trope is that if I could just get that done, then I would feel free. Yeah. And the problem is there is never a point where there is enough stuff done where you're feeling free. So David Dada's advice within this is that for the masculine, you've got to realize that you're never more free than you are in this exact moment now.
Absolutely.
And if you can accept that, then you have much greater choice, a much greater possibility about how you live your life.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's called the present because it's a gift. Simple as that. Beautiful. I think on that one, we'll say thank you very much, Ben. That was amazing. I'm going to have to get you on the podcast again, because I know we always have these interesting conversations, and if we carried on, we'll go on for a couple of hours. But thank you very much. If anybody's enjoyed this, have a look in the show notes for this podcast. You can get in touch with Ben. We'll put all this stuff in there. He's got lots of courses. And I'm going to say this on the podcast live. I did his Shadow and Ego course, which I know you're now going to be putting that as an online course, aren't you?
Yeah, very soon.
And for me, if you want to understand that voice in your head and you want to understand all of this stuff, that is a perfect start, because it's all linked to the ego and the shadow and all that good stuff by Carl Jung and all the rest of it. So thank you very much, Ben. And we'll probably get you on again. But yeah, amazing stuff. So thank you very much. Goodbye, everybody. Do you want to say goodbye, Ben?
Thank you. Goodbye, Ben.
Goodbye, Ben.
If you enjoyed today's podcast, why don't you come and join us at facebook.com/talking_minds. And don't forget to give us a little like. Thanks very much for listening. See you soon.